I am so pleased to be able to introduce Dr. Margaretta S. Frederick tonight. I got to know Margaretta when I was a student at the University of Delaware, and I spent over a year working with her at the Delaware Art Museum during the preparations for the exhibition Poetry and Beauty, the Pre-Raphaelite Art of Marie Spartelli-Stillman, which was a wonderful experience. Margaretta was really a mentor to me during my time, and I continue to consider her a mentor. So it's wonderful to have her here tonight. She also was the person who recommended me to join the Morris Society, which thus far seems to be working out very well. So thank you again for that, Margaretta. Dr. Frederick is the Annette Woolard-Provine Curator of the Bancroft Collection of Pre-Raphaelite art at the Delaware Art Museum, which I know many of you know is one of the preeminent Pre-Raphaelite collections, not just in the US, but in the world. Dr. Frederick received her PhD from Bryn Mawr College in 1996 with a specialization in British 19th century art. She has been integral to the museum's Bancroft collection for over 20 years, focusing on women within the Pre-Raphaelite circle. She is responsible for the current reinterpretation and reinstallation of the collection, which we will be hearing about tonight, which opened in late summer 2021. Other projects underway include an exhibition of the work of Evelyn and William de Morgan, which will be in fall 2022, and I'm really looking forward to, with an accompanying book of essays published by Yale University Press. She is also co-editing the collected letters of Mae Morris with Anna Mason, which is very exciting. All that said, Dr. Frederick, please take it away.
Great, well, thanks. Let's see, first, let's see if I can share my screen. Yes? Excellent. And I have volume. Yes. Very good. Well, good evening. And thank you all at William Morris Society for including me in your virtual series. And particularly thank you to Sarah for reaching out and issuing the invitation. So in February of this year, I presented a talk at CAA, part of a panel on the rhetoric of display as related to installations of British art. The panel was inspired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art's, at that time, recent reimagining of their British decorative arts galleries. And my paper addressed the Delaware Art Museum's planned reinterpretation and reinstallation of our ground floor galleries, including the Samuel and Mary Bancroft Collection of Pre-Raphaelite art, over which I preside. At the time of the CAA paper, the installation was not yet complete, having been delayed for over a year by the pandemic. So Sarah's kind invitation to discuss the installation, completed fully just maybe 2 weeks ago, was a welcome opportunity for reflection on the success and perhaps even the shortcomings in achieving the goals we set out to do when we initiated the project. So back in 2017, the Pre-Raphaelite Collection had reached the 10-year mark, and aesthetically it definitely needed a refresh, but it was the interpretation that most glaringly required reconsideration. Social justice movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and Time's Up were placing pressure on cultural institutions to reconsider virtually every aspect of their mission, from the time-worn, largely exclusionary narratives to the very collections we steward. The call for inclusion, community engagement, and cultural democracy was and is still loud and clear. So first, a bit of history to provide some context specific to Delaware. In 2015, the museum implemented an institution-wide mission-based strategy centered on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The plan included intensive restructuring of our internal practices in tandem with growing our outward-facing work. Our mission statement was amended, to read, and I'll quote just a bit here, to connect people to art, offering an inclusive and essential community resource that through its collections, exhibitions, and programs generates creative energy that sustains, enriches, empowers, and inspires. And this ideology led the design and interpretation process for the new galleries. An in-house team of museum curators and educators started by asking our community for input, inviting members and program partners to participate in focused conversations in the galleries. Participants could share what they liked and disliked, what they understood, and what confused them. And we took that input and began testing new approaches to interpreting the collection. These test cases could be as simple as a piece of white media paper with some proposed text and a box of pencils and some sticky notes nearby. Visitors could comment on what worked and what didn't. And in this particular example, we were attempting to establish context, which earlier discussion had revealed to be a real stumbling block for historic art. And I'll just say, and I promise, nowhere in the new installation is the word bollocks used, but it worked here to get people's attention, which was the idea. And they definitely responded to this particular cue. It was exciting to see that once context was established, audiences were quick to pick up societal and cultural concerns that were shared across the centuries. The Pre-Raphaelites' attempt to record these issues resonated in a way we had not quite understood previously. Many of the subjects that they addressed in their paintings, industrial pollution, women's rights, and racism, were particularly compelling to present-day viewers. The installation, titled Radical Beauty, opens with Dante Gabriel Rossetti's Lady Lilith, a single iconic female figure brushing her voluminous red hair in a room filled with flowers and luxurious objets d'art. Immediately to the right, an enlarged photograph depicts factories belching smoke on the Stoke-on-Trent sky, and adjacent to that, John Everett Millet's The Waterfall. Lilith sets the stage for our rich holdings in the work by Rossetti from the late 1860s forward. The photo immediately conveys a sense of time and place, one that is easily recognizable to 21st century viewers. The preponderance of landscape subjects taken up by these painters is here presented as an attempt to capture what was a rapidly changing geography transformed by the growth of cities and factory production. The waterfall, set in the Highlands of Scotland, is depicted with details almost botanical fidelity, a documentation that we suggest may well have felt essential given the rapidity of industrial encroachment. Placed adjacent to the large photograph, the point is made abundantly clear. In this first room, we also include Rossetti's Found. This unfinished painting featuring Fanny Cornforth as a fallen woman is the only example of a social justice painting in the collection, and therefore important in establishing this particular aspect of Pre-Raphaelitism. And just by way of explanation, the museum's core collection of Pre-Raphaelite art was assembled by Wilmington cotton finishing manufacturer Samuel Bancroft. Given his upper middle class status and entrepreneurial occupation, social justice subjects were not his preference. And indeed, the collection is quite heavy with Rossetti's work from the late 1860s and forward. And here I show you just a portion of what I silently call the Rossetti Wall of Women. When his style shifted from the Ruskinian-inspired detailed renderings of the 1850s exemplified by Found to images of richer tonality and the soft focus typical of Venetian painting, as exemplary here in La Bella Mano. Today's audiences, particularly the more feminist among us, find these images provocative, overly sexualized creations for the male gaze. And certainly we heard quite a bit about that in our salons and community conversations. Here, we suggest that these paintings might be read instead as yet another response to the impactful changes brought about by the advent of the modern era, specifically the rapidly changing role of women in society. These were the decades that ushered in the women's movement as more women joined the professional working world, and the first married women's property of the Married Women's Property Acts were being argued in Parliament. And it was also the early days of the suffragist movement. Rossetti was certainly aware of this groundswell of gender rebalancing, all the more so through his friendship with artist and women's reformist Barbara Lee Smith Bodichon. These later works by Rossetti, such as La Bella Mano, escapist visions filled with symbols and underlying dialogues about women, enhanced and intensified with poetic inscriptions on the frame, could be understood, we suggest, as public testament of the artist's conflicted response to the sea change in women's place in society. Countering Rossetti's perspective on societal gender realignment, and directly opposite the wall of women, a case of works specifically devoted to women artists associated with the Pre-Raphaelite circle. Didactics explain the Brotherhood's collaborative approach to art making, which offered a rare opportunity to breach the gender barrier for women who wish to practice as professional artists, crucial given their exclusion from the leading art schools of the day. The painter Alice Boyd, whose relationship with early Pre-Raphaelite William Bell Scott helped to open doors to a professional painting career, is one example of the surmounting of the barriers that a single connection could facilitate. Boyd's St. Columba's Farewell to the White Horse is included in this grouping, which also features decorative arts created by women. The three-dimensional arts offered a slightly more accessible career path, as government-sponsored art schools set up throughout the country were generally open to women students. And examples in this case include jewelry by Phoebe Tricaire, here one of her little lyrics. Another piece by Cecilia Adams. This is the Bacchanal Necklace with the figures of Pavlova and Nijinsky on either side of the locket and a quotation from the Rubaiyat handwritten inside. Or Ernestine Mills's tour de force enamel, The Octopus, a thinly veiled commentary on the treatment of suffragettes. And the sgraffito work of ceramic decorator Hannah Barlow, whose pot for Dalton & Co. is shown here. These are just some examples, and there are more throughout the galleries of this new arena available to female artists and artisans. Examples of non-white participants within the Victorian world have also, or evidence of non-white participants in the Victorian art world has also been historically overlooked. Models of color, for instance, are presented in numerous finished works, and examples in our collection include Simeon Solomon's Mother of Moses on the right and Toilet of a Roman Lady on the left. And yet, there is very little documentation of their lives as individuals. The identity of Fanny Eaton, the model for Jochebed, the mother of Moses, in the painting on the right, is identified in the accompanying wall text, highlighting her work both at the Royal Academy schools and for many of the Pre-Raphaelite artists. This painting was one which was very much got a lot of response during our focus groups, and we placed it in the installation at the end of a long view, which kind of invites viewers into the next gallery. A recent acquisition William Wise's academic study provides another rare bit of evidence for the Black model within the academic setting. Wise's oil sketch includes tiny brushstrokes at the upper right, color tests as he worked out the tonalities of light playing over the model's skin. Audiences are reminded that this was the period of the British Empire, during which England held colonies all over the world, and views towards pre-industrialized nations and their peoples were patronizing at best. And while slavery was abolished in the UK in 1833, attitudes took just a bit longer to change. This painting was acquired just as the installation was taking place, well after design plans had been completed. Room was made for the piece in the entrance gallery in order to draw attention to a theme that, as I suggested earlier, received particular emphasis in the community gatherings. We still know very little about the artist. Wise was primarily a decorator of ceramic tiles, but he trained at the South Kensington schools and was involved in the decorative scheme for the museum, contributing a mosaic design for the figure of Cellini, which sadly was never actually created and used in the final decoration. The concept of empire and colonial exploitation is further investigated in our display of decorative arts. The two chairs, which formed part of the suite of furniture William Morris designed and jointly decorated with Dante Gabriel Rossetti in the mid-1850s, when he and Edward Burne-Jones took up residence in London at Red Lion Square, ground a discussion of the arts and crafts movement. The history of Morris's subsequently founded design company is enhanced by a recently acquired stained glass window designed by Edward Burne-Jones and seen here to the left in this slide. The window provides a focal point for a brief discussion of the Gothic revival, a circumstance which of course provided the early firm with so much of their business. The design for Noah is dated 1874 to 76, the style reflecting Burne-Jones's visits to Italy and assimilation of Italian Renaissance art. The commission, however, for the chapel of Cheadle Royal Hospital near Manchester, interior shot here, came well after the death of both Morris and Burne-Jones and was directed by Henry Durrell between 1906 and 1915. When the chapel closed in 2001, excuse me, the stained glass was removed and placed on the market. I should just say this was purchased just before COVID and arrived at the museum in the crate just as we were about to shut down. And when we installed it in the galleries for this new installation, that was the first time all of us got to see it properly lit, and it was quite a moment. And you'll have to come and visit and see it in person. The museum is particularly fortunate to have a strong collection of period decorative arts, and an entire gallery is devoted to this portion of our holdings, including examples of pottery, furniture, jewelry, and metalwork. The diversity of styles reflecting both Mauritian medievalism as well as inspiration derived from design work imported from London from all reaches of the empire. Interpretive text explains that by the time the city had become a global center, offering the fruits exacted from colonial domains, imperialist bounty, which in turn inspired a rich and vast production of decorative art. Sorry. The range of influences represented are numerous and eclectic. Sometimes the historic and exotic exist in a single object, such as Bruce Talbert's design for this parlor cabinet produced by Gillow and Company. Ebonized wood reflects Japanese furniture design. The drawer pulls reference the Gothic, and the classical figures in pressed leather on the doors look back even further. In other work, the influence is more focused, as in William de Morgan's Peacock Charger, in which the design the designer and chemist recreates the Islamic technique of luster glaze. Similarly, Middle Eastern inspiration is found in this Delarobbia pottery vase, the lotus-like flower design by Charles Collis and painted by Lizzie Wilkins. Medieval forms are the basis for Edward Spencer's chalice created for the Artificers Guild, in which half an ostrich egg forms the cup. And Kate Harris also looks back to the Middle Ages in this casket in silver with a cutout pattern and enamel inlay, giving it an Art Nouveau feel. Continuing under the eclectic heading, we also have Burne-Jones's Viking ship, a window which was recently cleaned and relit and is simply stunning. Part of a Morris and Company commission for Catherine Lorillard Wolfe's Finland, a summer home in Newport, Rhode Island, about which I know you have all heard a great deal over the past several years. So I've given you a quick, very quick run through of the reinstallation and a partial view of our collections. Hopefully this will entice you to visit either individually or collectively. And therein ends my sermon, but I'd be happy to take any questions on either the reinstallation or the collections, if there are any. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Margaretta. My cat just ran through the room. Like I said, she doesn't like Zoom, so.
At least my dog didn't bark.
Yes, well, they still have time. We can hear from them. But thank you so much for that. I am so excited to come see everything. Everything looks so wonderful. The stained glass in particular, I'm so excited about. The Viking ship looks incredible.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll have questions. The first thing that occurred to me, though, that I would love to hear about is, because you had this community feedback, which, having lived in Wilmington, I'm very interested in that. I was just wondering if you got any interesting feedback that you remember about any of the Morris objects. I think particularly of the chairs, which are such quirky objects. I was wondering if you heard anything interesting from the public about those.
Okay, in those specific community gatherings, no, but people were really interested when we did some of the text work and put things up in the galleries. I would much rather talk about the art than about the lives of these people, but there was something about explaining to people that these two very young men who had just graduated from college came to London and kind of move into their first apartment, and they needed furniture. You know, that kind of just basic, you know, everyone could relate to that. And there were a lot of literally, oh, I get it, you know, kind of comments in the comment box. So yeah.
I love that. That's how I always try to explain them too. It's like, these were young men in their early 20s, and this is what they came up with. And people,
yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Does anyone else have a question that they'd like to ask? Jude, please go ahead.
Margaretta, thanks very much. Really appreciated that walk through the exhibition. My question has to do with what you began with, and that is, you had raised the questions about social justice issues, Black Lives Matter. I wonder if you have in the past, or if you think it's something that you might want to do, and that's a special collection of the Pre-Raphaelites writ large, addressing social issues. It may be costly to sort of add to your collection. I'm thinking of a piece like Brett's the stone maker, for example, the stone breaker.
And you know, there's a private collector in okay, never mind. There is a private collector in the United States who has a version of the Stonebreakers.
Right.
And we actually had that on view for a while. That's a powerful painting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, they're everywhere. I mean, in terms of, I'm just thinking of the logistics. I mean, it would be a show with a lot of loans. Right. But it's certainly, wow, it would be great. Yeah.
And that could include some of the ceramic pieces that came out against West Indian slave labor and sugar and what have you. I mean, it could be quite an exhibition, but again, it's problematic in terms of funding, perhaps.
Yeah,
But
but even if we don't do it, somebody should.
yeah, definitely.
I mean, and somebody with bigger bucks. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's kind of funny that they haven't. I always thought when we were just so knee deep in all the immigration stuff, all I could think of was, if only I had the last view of England. If I had that painting in my collection, I would be, I'd be all over this.
Yeah. Well, MoMA has I think it might be at MoMA, it's in Germany at the time, where it's looking at the use of white marble to sort of maybe turn people who were otherwise people of color into white marble. And it's somewhere in Germany at this point. I'm sure MoMA is going to pick it up, but it's just driving everyone crazy. Maybe I will in the chat find it and list it. Yeah.
That actually reminded me that I forgot to drop all of my links in the chat, so I will do that in a minute. But first, I will read a question from the chat for you, Margaretta. Barbara Stewart asks, is this reinstallation permanent or a temporary exhibition? You have 200 Pre-Raphaelite pieces, are all on display or much in storage. Beyond those mentioned, what painters are included, particularly of the Pre-Raphaelite sisters?
Okay, that was a lot of questions in one question.
I should have broken it up.
Okay, so let's see. Number one, this is like testing my memory. Number one, this is a permanent collection installation, so it will be up for at least 10 years, just like the last one. There are 200 plus works in the collection. About 60% or more of the collection is works on paper. And works on paper, as I'm sure you all know, are light sensitive and can only be up for a certain amount of time. And then they have to rest 3 months up, 6 to 9 months down. And so, no, not all 200 plus works are on view at the same time. We rotate works on paper in and out. Sadly, most work by women artists in this period is on paper. Not always, but most. And so those are the works that get rotated in and out the most. Currently on view, we have a wonderful painting that's on long-term loan that is an oil painting. I didn't talk about it because it's not ours. It's on long-term loan. It's by Eleanor Fortescue Brickdale, and it's, I think its title is something to the effect of A Visit to Botticelli's Studio. It's a wonderful period piece set in Florentine, 15th century Florence, with the Medici brothers escorting Simonetta Vespucci to Botticelli's studio. It's wonderful. That's one of the few examples of female artist paintings that is up permanently as long as we have it, because it's oil. Most are works on paper.
I'll of course weigh in and say that you do have some wonderful Marie Spartelli-Stillman pieces in the collection as well, which I mentioned her earlier, but I was really thrilled when I was there to see the wonderful embroidered dress, which also can't be on display all the time because it is the textile.
Yeah, and it was just up. We had a show on what we've acquired over the last 10 years, and the dress was up just recently. Marie Stillman will be featured in the next Works on Paper rotation, which happens in early November.
Great. Then I will try to get up there for that rotation.
You gotta come.
Love seeing her work.
Yeah.
So we have from Shelley Schrader. She asked, with this reimagining of the Pre-Raphaelites, is the theme of imperialism covered? And I think you mentioned that a little bit, but I know we would all love to hear more about that.
Yeah, where we can touch on that the most effectively is in terms of the decorative arts, because it's a great time to talk about this kind of eclectic nature of what was going on in Victorian and Edwardian decorative arts, which has much to do with the fact that London was this global center, and there were products and designs coming into the city from all over the empire, and very much had to do with feeding that kind of eclectic moment in the decorative arts in England. Also a very rich moment in the decorative arts in England.
We just had another one come in from Jesse Hellman, who asks, could you borrow the Valentine card made by May Morris for Bernard Shaw that he thinks, or she thinks, is in Walthamstow? I'm sure we would all love to see that. So
Yes. We could. It hadn't occurred to me, but that's a great idea.
more May Morris, as we found out last month. I mean, as you know, we all love hearing more about May and seeing more about May. So.
Yeah, you know, that is the one, I would say the one in my tenure as curator, I have added pretty much everything on my wish list, an example of pretty much everything on my wish list to the collection, but May Morris is the one that I have just not yet been able to find the right piece, you know. Yeah.
As soon as you get it, I'll be there seeing it hung. We know I love May. We had another question from Barbara Stewart saying that she recalls the Pre-Raphaelite Sisters exhibit at the National Portrait Gallery in London about 3 years ago, included among the works of the women artists, a fair number of Black female models. And of course, you mentioned Fanny Eaton. Were any of these models encouraged to express artistic talent, as were some of the white female models?
That's a good question. Fanny Eaton is the one model of color whose biography I know reasonably well. And I would think that given her economic situation, she was married to a cab driver. She modeled quite regularly, while raising a family of, I think, something like 10 children. So I would think even if she showed if she had an inclination, it would have been quite difficult given the just sheer social and economic situation she found herself in. I will say that one of the things that came out of that Pre-Raphaelite Sisters show that I thought was very interesting was that an artist like, he's about to bark, I'm just going to tell you right now, there's going to be a barking dog soon. Artists that like Elizabeth Siddall, she was mentored by Rossetti, but the thing that gets lost in the translation is she wanted to be an artist before she met Rossetti, you know, and I just think that's really important. I think that's a key point. Yeah.
And that was true of Marie as well, really, wasn't? I always say Marie because I got to know her so well, but Spartelli
like,
Stillman,
my buddy, like
my good friend Marie.
Yeah. Oh yeah, she definitely was determined to become an artist. Yeah.
Great. Do we have any other questions? Does anyone want to say one or put any more in the chat?
Sarah, I just uploaded the link. It's called Gods in Color.
Oh.
And I gave you the website, and it has a lovely write-up on it. I hope it comes to MoMA at some point. I've been watching every announcement just to see if it comes.
Okay.
Oh, that's great.
Good.
No. Excellent. I will say during my announcements at the beginning, I will do another Morris Society plug. If you check our website and check our current information about joining the society, we currently have an offer where you receive a letterpress broadside with a Morris quote on it if you join. So I'm also going to put the link to that in the chat, and I've put the links to the other things that I mentioned. Oh, there's a broadside. Jennifer Rabideau is showing us the broadside. It's a beautiful thing. I just packed mine because I'm moving, but I'm really excited to put it up in my new apartment. We have a question from Peter Stansky, who asks, what do we know about the political views of the circle other than, of course, Morris himself?
Of the Pre-Raphaelite circle? Wow.
Peter's nodding.
Wow. That's interesting.
I know William Rossetti wrote about the Civil War. I don't know if that's related, but he gave his opinion of the American War.
Huh.
Of course, we know. We know a bit about Burne-Jones. I mean, Burne-Jones, of course, was Morris's greatest friend, but he didn't agree with him politically, but you know, it wasn't. I mean, my hunch. I mean, it must be known because I mean, there's a lot of Rossetti scholarship, but I don't know that. I don't. Maybe Michael knows the answer. My hunch is that they were verging towards apolitical, but that may be that might be totally wrong.
You know, there was a bit about Georgie Burne-Jones being involved a little bit in politics, particularly. Yeah, Tim, where did I read that?
And down in Rottingdean, where
Yes,
they
thank
had
you.
the house, she would
Yeah.
put up banners against the war and all sorts of things. And she gathered the villagers all together, so she was pretty active in the local village.
Of course, there's always the fascination, but I mean, this is getting somewhat off the topic of what they call the McDonald sisters. I mean, Georgiana being sort of probably left liberal, Mrs. Kipling presumably agreeing with her husband, and of course Mrs. Baldwin, what Alfred Baldwin's mother. So I mean, the whole range, and of course what happens in England, that Baldwin has a sort of, so to speak, family connection, where actually in the 1930s was and he, at the point that he's the Conservative Prime Minister of Britain, opened the William Morris Gallery. The politics, you know, is obvious, and particularly in this moment when we're so legitimately concerned about these issues, I think it's sort of difficult because I think there's some danger of imposing, or you know, to what degree say the Pre-Raphaelites can be tied in with imperialism. I mean, it's wonderful to look at things in new ways, but it's you know, but it also one has to be careful, I think, at the same time.
I will just add that Morris did have one comment on Rossetti's politics, in which he said that Rossetti was really too involved in himself to be concerned with larger political issues.
That sounds very Rossetti-like.
Not
I
very
picked the
long.
wrong time to take a drink there, Michael. I almost spat it back out. That's a very, very Morrisian and very Rossetti. Right. Do we have any more questions?
I just want to be clear about which came first, the plan to rearrange the gallery and then put on the social justice theme, or did the social justice idea nudge the rearrangement of the gallery?
Okay, let's see. Around 2015, I realized I needed to do something about the Pre-Raphaelite galleries. The installation was 10 years old and I needed to make some changes. Without going into a whole lot of museum history, it became very clear to us that we needed to get with the program and we needed to address a broader community, that we could not exist and would have no reason for existing unless we addressed a broader audience. And that was a bit ahead of the curve for most museums. And there were some reasons, but that was, so I would say all those things were happening at about the same time. And then it was just going to be the Pre-Raphaelite galleries to begin with. But then we thought, well, let's just look at the entire ground floor. Upstairs had been done. The contemporary art galleries had been reinstalled fairly recently. And it seemed natural, given that we were kind of making a concerted effort inside and out to address social issues and become more a part of our community, and become a center of our community, that these things needed to go together. All these things needed to go together. I mean, yeah.
As a former Wilmington resident, I was very excited to hear about the reconsideration of the museum in general and of the Pre-Raphaelite galleries, because for those of you who don't know Wilmington, it is a very, very diverse community, and it's wonderful to see that engagement with the community. Obviously, I'm a fan of whatever happens with the Pre-Raphaelite collection. But
Wilmington is approximately 70,000 people. And of those 70,000 people, a very high percentage live below the poverty line. And the museum is situated within the city limits, just within the city limits. And, we need to be speaking to everybody.
Margaretta, do you work, in that case, do you work closely with the schools?
I don't personally,
But
but
doesn't
our educators work very closely with the schools. We have relationships with several schools, one in particular where every class for starting with every second grade class that then becomes the third grade class and the fourth grade class visits the museum on a regular basis every year, like every Tuesday, this is their museum,
Right. One of the things that I'm always amazed by is when I'm in London and I'm at the Tate Britain, or several times at the Liverpool Art Museum, and I'll be in there, and there were students who were just sitting around drawing and painting and making notes, sitting on the floor in the gallery as if it were back in their dorm or their room. And they were encouraged to do that. And I can't recall if I see how much of that I see here.
Yeah, I don't know about, one of the big issues here is that school budgets have been cut so drastically that schools can't afford to bus their children to the museums. So we actually have a special fund which helps to pay for travel costs to get these kids to the museum. And we also go into their classrooms.
I'm in Boston, and one of the things that I did some years ago in my other role as dean was institute a program for incoming students who were students of low economic area working with the Peabody Essex Museum, which is around the corner from the university. And they would come and work with the museum staff that put together a curriculum for them for about 4 or 5 weeks. And so every day, these students who are incoming freshmen, it was called a bridge program, will go into the Peabody Essex. And what we were working on is the kind of cultural poverty that so many of these students who come in from, mostly from the inner city Boston area, had no access to. And it continues now. This is now 12 years later, and it still continues. And it's working closely with the university and incoming freshmen with the Peabody Essex Museum.
There are 2 questions, one from me and one from somebody else.
Yeah, we have more questions in the chat actually that have filtered in. So
yeah,
we get to talking. Let's see, Jesse Hellman, would you like to come on and ask your question? Jesse just said, I have a question about the perspective in Burne-Jones's The Council Chamber. Would you like to elaborate, Jesse?
Yes, this is Jesse's wife, Debbie.
Okay.
So we visited the museum this past year, and I was very struck by that painting because of the perspective. It's a very,
Right
almost,
up at the front of the picture plane. It's right there, like it comes right out.
Right, exactly. But if you look at the carpeting, the angle of those plaid marks, I would imagine that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
Yes.
So
it's almost as though the artist is expecting you to stay, about a quarter of the way over from the left. Okay, so from the left, moving just a quarter over, and that's where that line from the carpet comes directly at you. But what I know, which is kind of odd, because I would have expected that line, that more vertical, what would essentially be a vertical line, but it looks like it's coming towards you, that would be over towards the center of the painting. But indeed, it's over to the left. And the funny thing is, when I move even further over to the left, even beyond the edge of the painting, all of those lines in the carpet seem to turn. And I don't know whether you noticed that as well, but it was a very interesting experience for me.
Well, I'm going to go and look at it and think about it in that way.
Yeah, and I don't know whether there was something intentional going on or whether it was just kind of a fluke the way it worked out.
Could that have been because it was designed as part of a series of
I know, but
continuing?
you know what, Tim, I wasn't going to go there, and I'll tell you why.
Hmm.
Because, you know, that painting is a bit of a one-off, right? I mean, he started it because it was going to be part of a series, and then he left it off, and then he did the whole series without it. And then he
Hmm.
came back and just did, you know what I mean? So, and I don't know what he did in between when he started it and when he came back. And at least when he came back, he wasn't thinking of it as part of a series. He just thought, I can finish this and sell it, you know?
Yeah.
So I knew that was a good, I was there. I was right there with you.
I provided a link in the chat for those of you who want to see the picture to imagine it. It does have a very interesting perspective. And we have another question from Peter. Could you remind us how and why Bancroft became interested in collecting the artworks?
Okay. Well, he had, first off, he was a bit of a business brain. He really was. And he handled the patents largely for the company and therefore traveled a great deal, often back and forth to England where there was still family, but also further abroad. At any rate, he had a cousin outside of Manchester who was an architect who was very connected with theater. And he was kind of knew a few of the collectors, mostly because he did things to redesign their houses for them and so on, the early collectors, Pre-Raphaelites, and he introduced Bancroft to this work. And it was largely through this cousin, Alfred Derbyshire, that Bancroft became interested in the Pre-Raphaelites. And then just because he'd already laid or kind of lit the match, when a collection came up for sale that had water willow in it, Derbyshire wrote Bancroft a letter, and we have this great letter where he's illustrated it with a picture of water willow, and he tells him, you know, you should buy this. And Samuel Bancroft does, and that's the beginning of his collection.
Right. Unless anyone else has any other questions, I will give it a minute, but thank you all so much for coming and for providing such wonderful questions. And Margaretta, thank you
I just want to
again.
say, hi, Alice. Sorry. Okay, good. I'm good.
It's nice to see familiar faces in the yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you, Margaretta, for a wonderful talk and such a beautiful re-envisioning of that collection, which I know many of us will be very, very excited to see in person as soon as we can.